With a revised economic projection from 1.3% to 1.1% rather, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana warns of a constrained fiscal environment with escalating debt service costs now making up 22 cents of every £1 that the government spends. Has the Finance Minister sufficiently reconfigured government's expenditure program to accommodate the increasing constrained fiscal outlook? I make sense of this with Nkosikhulule Nyembezi, who is an economist at the Human Sciences Research Council. Nkosi, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Perhaps to start here, given that we have a lowered revised economic growth, but inflation slowing down significantly, or at least proportionally, one can say that the fiscal environment isn't yet going to receive a shock factor that changes it in any direction. Has the Minister of Finance sufficiently reconfigured government's spending program to make way for cost of living adjustments, but importantly as well, for a constrained fiscal outlook?
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back. I'm a policy analyst at the University of Cape Town.
My apologies for that.
I was following the minister's speech, including the expectations raised across the sectors, civil society, labor, and business. And indeed, there was a sense of hope that South Africa is getting somewhere, especially if you can translate the promises and the statements into action, in the sense that it's now a government of national unity, the composition of the cabinet and the decision makers. Then there is hope that what the left hand is doing will work hand in hand with what the right hand is doing. So there is that sense of optimism, including the fact that the minister mentioned that with the issue on blacklisting by the international agencies, South Africa is nearing the completion of the 22 steps that it needs to take to get back onto the good books. So it's optimism.
Yeah. The minister says we're now exiting what is considered the first phase of Operation Vulindlela and heading into the second phase. The first phase was reforms of certain key state institutions, and very specifically the regulatory framework in what they call the network economy. The second phase is about enacting some of those reforms into commercial viability. Do we have the sufficient capital and capital investment to get some of these reforms going? The one of which is Transnet, for instance. Transnet will now concede the bulk of its railway line for private operators to operate on. But do private operators have the liquidity to be able to get locomotives privately owned locomotives onto the Transnet line?
That is a big question mark that lingers on the minds of everyone, because this has been spoken about for many years. We're expecting tangible announcements as to partners that are coming onto the table to do the state-private partnership. But because there are no mentions of specific partners to do that and what is it that they are bringing onto the table, then there's a bit of apprehension when it comes to that. You will know that South Africa competes with different economies, whether at a BRICS level, at a G20, G8 level. So it's not like we are the favor rate of the investors. We have to compete in this space. But what is also surprising as a cold water is that even the local investors are not coming up as enthusiastic to say the money we are sitting on, we are going to pump into these areas. Of course, an ordinary person would say there are some improvements here and there. We see the railway lines have opened in places like Cape Town, Western Cape, and maybe that will roll out in terms of goods trains that will take the produce to the shores, yes.
Yeah. And just lastly, debt is the sore thumb that constrains our fiscal program. The Minister of Finance has announced that the debt to GDP ratio will be north of 75% to GDP by the end of the fiscal. And importantly here, every 22 cents of every R1 that we spend in our fiscal program goes towards servicing debt. It's now the second biggest line item on our debt, on our fiscal program, after learning and culture. How do we get control of debt, and is there a sense in the National Treasury on how to contain debt?
Yes, that is a sore thumb. The first thing is to cut down on wasteful expenditure, on unnecessary expenditure, including the wage bill, the public wage bill. We see that there are some areas where government is not supposed to be spending as it is, whereas it is not prioritizing some of the areas that are key, including education, including health, because you need to have long-term investment to build the economy. The overall word that we hear is that the debt issue is not a priority issue as it is put out there by the minister. The issue is supposed to be economic growth, employment creation, because if we get that right, then we'll collect enough revenue to be able to deal with the debt. So we're supposed to invest in areas that are going to create job creation, that are going to attract investment. Then that will be a spin-off to deal with the debt.
We don't have the capital to invest, at least not at a government level, right? We only invest only about 20 cents of what we spend. 20 cents on every R1 that we spend is a capital investment expenditure. The question is, can we get out of low growth economic turmoil without borrowing more?
The biggest investment government is supposed to be making is on policy adjustment, policy implementation to ensure that the South African economy is attractive at local, provincial and national level. There are opportunities at local level to make that, to turn that corner. So we need to capitalize on what we have as a country, including this issue of the adjustment of policies or implementation of the good policies that have been implemented. We will remember that in the 6th administration, there was a lot of consultation with different sectors, the seminars, the imbizos and all that. And there were a lot of good suggestions and recommendations as to what must happen. So those need to be implemented. They are shovel ready and they are low-hanging fruits. If we can get that right in this first of the 3 medium-term budget policy, we can go a long way, and that is what most people are looking to see happening.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time there. Really do appreciate it. Nkosikhulule Nyembezi, who is a policy analyst at the University of Cape Town.